Our shadow is forever hiding from itself. Rather than confront our own darkness, we project these unwanted qualities onto others. When we are projecting our shadow selves, it sounds like this. She's so self-centered. He's so full of himself. These people are idiots. What a loser. Afraid of our own unworthiness and simultaneously afraid of our own greatness, we unconsciously transfer these qualities onto another rather than owning them ourselves. Those we project on own pieces of our unclaimed darkness as well as pieces of our unclaimed light. Until we take back all that we have projected away, what we can't be with won't let us be. One of the most frequently asked questions I get is, how do you know if you're projecting? If it's your stuff or theirs? I think it was best said by revered philosopher and psychologist Ken Wilber. He says that if a person or thing in our environment informs us, if we receive what is happening as information, a point of interest, we probably aren't projecting. On the other hand, if it affects us, we're pointing our fingers, judging if we're plugged in, chances are that we are a victim of our own projections. Think of someone from your own life who disgusts, annoys, or repulses you, and think of the qualities about them that you most hate. Now imagine this person standing right in front of you, and I want you to put your hand out, point your finger at them, and say, "You're an idiot," or "You're a know-it-all," or "You're selfish." Now stop where you are. Keep your finger pointing at them, and now notice that one finger is pointing at them, and where are the other three fingers pointing? Back at you. This is the phenomenon of projection. Instead of acknowledging the qualities within us that we dislike, we project them onto someone else. We project them onto our mothers, our kids, our friends, or even better, some famous public figure who we have never even met. If I asked each of you what you love about these people, you would each have a different response. The people that you hate also represent some aspect of yourself that you don't own. Notice what you think and feel as you look at each of these people. Whatever we judge or condemn in another is ultimately a disowned or rejected part of ourselves.
I was watching the events of 9/11 on TV with a friend of mine, and after that we were driving down the street. I turned to my friend and I said, "You know, from now on, the Arabs are going to be the new blacks. They're going to get the brunt of a lot of projections that blacks have carried in this culture for a long time." Now, a lot of times, blacks react. We react to those projections, and we project back. And that creates a vicious cycle. And the ego consciousness just responds the way it should, really, because it's designed to respond as a survival mechanism. That's what the ego is all about, to help us survive. But it's mechanical, it's reactive. When an aggressive, negative energy is directed at us, the ego immediately wants to defend and react. Of course, when you react to a projection, you become that projection. And I didn't want to become an angry black man. That doesn't mean that I don't get angry. I certainly can and do get angry, but I express it and let it go.
There's an old Sufi story about a philosopher who made an appointment to debate with a Sufi wisdom teacher named Nasruddin. When the philosopher arrived at his appointment, he found Nasruddin away from his home. Infuriated, the philosopher picked up a piece of chalk and wrote "stupid oath" on Nasruddin's gate. When Nasruddin got home and saw this, he rushed right over to the philosopher's house. "I had forgotten that you were to call, and I'm sorry I missed our appointment," he said. "But I remembered it the minute I saw that you had written your name on my gate." The great Swiss psychologist Carl Jung, who coined the word shadow and shadow work, said, "That is the shadow, the person we'd rather not be." Rush Limbaugh hated drug addicts, and then it was revealed that he was one himself. Reverend Ted Haggard railed against homosexuals and was later caught in a drug and male prostitute scandal. A powerful example of projection at play is that of the ex-governor of New York, Eliot Spitzer. As a public official, Spitzer worked tirelessly to rid the streets of prostitution rings. Ultimately, he wound up getting busted for having a relationship with a call girl, which ruined his reputation and his political future. If we look at this through the eyes of the shadow, I would suggest that sometime long ago, probably as a young man, he had the impulse to sleep with a hooker. Since this wasn't politically or socially acceptable, he buried this impulse deep inside, only to be brought down by this very unconscious urge. It's fascinating to see that he tried to destroy the temptation in the outer world because unconsciously he knew that the real danger lurked in his inner world. This is why we want to deal with the shadow. Rather than trying to convince you that you're not all those negative things and encouraging you to think a good thought, shadow work urges you to get in there and to be with what you are resisting, because what you resist will persist. If you don't deal with your shadow, it will deal with you.
The cost of ignoring a destructive pattern is that you're going to self-destruct. You will implode rather than explode.
My training is as a neurologist, so I've spent well over 3 decades studying how the nervous system organizes this information. And it's really quite interesting when you look at the fact that really, even though we think of having one brain, we actually have 3 different brains. We have this very primitive brain, which some people call the reptilian brain. And if you look at a reptile or look at a crocodile, it really just has 2 responses, on or off. So if you ever watched a crocodile try and eat a wildebeest, it seems to be very quiet, and suddenly it explodes, and then it goes back into its quiet state. So that response is really a very basic survival response. But the mammalian brain, which is sometimes known as the limbic brain, has created a modulating effect on that reptilian brain. So the limbic system has brought into this very primitive on-off response gradations, meaning you can be a little bit on, significantly on, really on. But then on top of that mammalian brain, really just for the last couple 100,000 years, we've evolved this human brain, which is called the neocortex, neo meaning new cortex, new covering of the brain. And that actually allows us for the first time in evolutionary history to decide whether or not we want to react at all.
If we look at brain scans, we can actually see in a traumatized brain this part of the brain kind of shutting down, becoming dark. The part of the brain that is associated with emotions is that part, you might be familiar with the fight or flight or freeze response. The amygdala, which is the fear processing center in this part of the brain, really becomes bright. So what happens is trauma changes brain functioning, and then that triggers changes in stress hormones in the body, which are not a good thing.
It's crucial to be able to recognize and express any kind of pain. Without that, it stays with us, it lodges in the body, and it causes us to react, to live unconsciously.
The unresolved issues that people have in their bodies, their emotions, has an absolute direct correlation with their physical bodies, their health and their well-being, their expression of wellness overall. They think that their health is somehow separate from their emotions. They are intimately connected.
Obesity, diabetes, heart disease, and cancer, they're all the result significantly of chronic, unprocessed, inflammatory molecules that have their correlates in the psychological world of chronic, unprocessed emotions and experiences.
Every single one of those conditions is a byproduct of our stress levels. It affects our health intimately. Most people are aware that what they eat and what they drink affect their toxicity levels. What they don't realize is that what they think and the emotions that they built up over years are really the most toxic.
The ways that people have dealt with this traditionally and historically are inadequate. My patients are in overwhelm. This is not new age mumbo jumbo. This is actually hard science. The science here now is indisputable that thoughts, that emotions affect the organs of the body.
We have to be mindful with every single thought that we have every single day. How do we want to create our heaven or our hell? How do we treat one another? Because we are the source of everything within us.
There is a poem by Rumi called The Guest House, which in many ways describes the human journey.
This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a neediness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they are a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture, still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond.
Repressing our anger may seem like a good solution, but pretty soon we run out of places to hide. Divorce, stress at work, financial trouble or tension within our families provoke the shadow until finally it erupts. The ancient Vedic text known as the Bhagavad Gita states that man should discover his own reality, not thwart himself. For he has himself as his only friend or as his only enemy. But if he rejects his own reality, the self will war against him. It's easy to love yourself when you wake up feeling strong and worthy and you have enough money in the bank and you feel great. But how do you love yourself when you feel broke or when you've been hurt or abused?
And that sets up the conflict, which as we get older, those wonderful forces that we've locked up in our shadow are rattling the cages. And sometimes if we're distracted, they sneak out and we think, and the people around us think, what were we thinking? And the answer is we weren't thinking.
When we're pressed, the shadow can look like this. We have to resolve the undigested emotions that are buried in our bodies and lodged as stress in our minds. We have to unearth, own, and embrace the very parts of ourselves that have caused us the most pain. And the moment we do, the light of our awareness will begin the process of transforming them. We think we're alone. We think we're different. We feel isolated or abandoned. And then when we come together, we find out that we all go through traumas, that to be human is to be challenged, and that everyone has gone through some trauma. And if we're courageous, we see that there is gold to be mined in every experience.
It's very interesting because I don't remember a single day where my mother was not drunk, and I had to live through this. I didn't understand it. Very, very confused by it all. Why is this happening? Why is this happening? Who are you? Because as she would drink and as she became into that space, I knew I didn't know her. And I just wished she was dead. I said, I wish you were dead. Wish you were dead. I want the pain out of my life, Because you don't belong here. Whoever you are, this intoxicated person, and as a child looking at this, because my father wasn't there either, I had to figure this out. All I did was wish she was dead, right? Well, not until 30, 40 years later, after she had passed over, she was many, many years after that, and after getting involved in this work, I realized that that was indeed one of the most incredible blessings of my life. I learned from that situation about compassion, and I learned about forgiveness. And that's a pretty big one to have to learn about forgiveness. We see these things as horrific experiences, terrible experiences, dark experiences, when in truth, they're really enlightened experiences because they help us to be who we are. They help us to be compassionate. They help us to be forgiving. They help us to look at someone very, very differently.
What doesn't kill us makes us stronger.
At a certain point in life, it's about saying, I have been through what I've been through. I've succeeded in some ways, perhaps, but I've also failed in some ways. I've been strong at times, but I've also been weak at times. I've gotten some things right, and other things I've gotten wrong. And some things have gone well for me, and some things have been damn awful. The issue is, what am I going to do with all of that? Two people can go through the exact same situation on an external level, but internally they do two completely different things with it. That's why we read incredible stories about people who went through the Holocaust or people who were victims of genocide and yet they survived, and yet they go on to live extraordinary lives. And then you meet other people who went through a fraction of that in terms of an internal trauma, but they stay stuck in it forever. We begin to ask ourselves, what am I getting from staying stuck there? What am I avoiding from staying stuck there? And what we are avoiding is the greatest challenge of all, and that is to be who we can be in order to serve the world.
I asked a few people to share their own shadow stories. Some of them are complete, others are ongoing. All of them are portraits of a fearless commitment to transformation. Sui is like that beautiful combination of a miracle. That part of her that she deems so worthless and unlovable actually comes bearing the greatest gifts and makes her the shining light that she is today.
The pain that I've been carrying throughout my life was the pain of believing that I was abandoned by my parents because I wasn't pure enough. I'm actually mixed in terms of, half Japanese, half Chinese. I was considered mixed and impure enough to be raised in Japan. My parents live in Japan and they left me with my grandparents in Malaysia. I just felt so abandoned and rejected. My father ended up getting a divorce from my mother. He remarried another Japanese woman, but nobody ever told me that when my father came back with his wife, that she's not my mother. I felt the immediate rejection, that they didn't want me in their lives, and that they would rather have, 2 dogs than have me with them. Because I have always discarded my Japanese identity in favor of my Malaysian Chinese identity. I felt like the country has betrayed me, and I used that pain to really put it into my work. I heard the project was in trouble in Japan, and I volunteered to go to Japan to fix this problem because I know that I could do it. That one day I stepped into Tokyo, and I just felt that this is where I need to be to really discover and explore the Japanese half of me. In less than 3 years, I created a business from $40 million to over $200 million in a country dominated by men. You know, never heard of a half Japanese, half Chinese woman being a business leader in a big US telecom world. So I couldn't be the leader I am today without going through the emotions and the pain that I went through my whole life.
If we look deeper, we will see that we all have a divine recipe. All of us have shame about things that have happened to us. We've all gone through difficult times. We address these issues so we can quiet our minds, heal our bodies, and get closer to our heart's desires. Hector had to let go of his macho persona to make peace with the one that he loved the most, which was his father.
My father was a traditional Mexican man in the sense of working hard, wanting to get ahead, wanting to provide for his family. And as a young boy, I was looking for his love. I wanted his attention. The challenge was trying to figure out what was wrong with me, because obviously something was wrong with me. If, number one, he's not giving me the attention I want as a little boy, not giving me the love, yelling at me, you know, being verbally abusive, obviously I did something wrong, there's something wrong with me. So I carried that story from that point on for a long time. And I realized he probably wasn't going to do it the way I wanted. He probably wasn't going to tell me what I wanted when I was a little boy. Mi hijo, te quiero, te adoro, I love you, son. I did some personal growth work. I went inside, looked at the shame, the guilt, the pain. I went through that, I healed that. And I was able to have that forgiveness with my dad and let that go. I wasn't going to tell him I love you for him. I was going to tell him I love you for me. My dad passed on. And I'm really grateful that I listened to that inner voice that said, you know, go ahead and tell your dad that you love him. Do it for yourself.
Dr. Edie Eger is one of the most beautiful divine women on the planet today. And she survived the worst circumstances, something that most of us can't even ever imagine.
May 22nd, 1944, when I arrived in Auschwitz, there was chaos. My father was separated from us and my sister, and I, facing Dr. Mengele. I didn't know who he was until later. And he pointed to my mom to go to the left and my sister and I to the right. I asked the inmate, when will I see my mother? And she pointed at the chimney, and fire was coming out of the chimney. And she said, you better talk about your mother in past tense, she is burning there. My sister and I hugged each other and said, the spirit never dies, the spirit never dies. I remember that so vividly, even today. In Auschwitz, we didn't know when we took a shower whether water is going to come out or gas. And then there were others who ran into the barbed wires, they got electrocuted. And that night, Dr. Mengele came to the barracks and wanted to be entertained. and my friends who knew that I was a very talented gymnast, and so they volunteered me, and I ended up dancing for Dr. Mengele. I closed my eyes, and the music was Tchaikovsky, and I was dancing in Budapest, the Romeo and Juliet. I completely dissociated, and we had choices. I chose to look at the guards, but they were more in prison than I was. I remember they took my blood about twice a week, and I asked, why are you taking my blood? And the man said, I'm taking your blood to aid the German soldiers so we can win the war. I said to myself, I was a pacifist, I was a ballerina, I bet with my blood you're never gonna win the war. So I created a part in me that I was able to still be in charge of, and not allowing anything what happened externally to murder my spirit. I remember I said, if I survive today, then tomorrow I'll be free.
I remember when Marita came to the shadow process and everybody was looking for the negative qualities they needed to embrace. Marita couldn't even say hers, and I kept asking, what is so horrible that you can't even say it? And she said, because of my background, mine is that I'm a Nazi.
I was born in Germany in 1955, 10 years after the war. I found out when I was 11 or 12 what my country had done. This is a subject we never talked about. My grandfather wouldn't tell me about his experience. My mother wants nothing to do with this. I'm not the only German that holds this and lives this and hides this, and I found many ways to sabotage myself from ever tasting power or success, because Hitler was successful to come into power, and his power was horribly abused. I didn't interact with any Germans at all. I stayed away from them, and I did not interact with any Jewish person because I didn't want to cause any more pain, and I was ashamed.
Samya was willing to shine light on the darkness and willing to take back her own projections for the good of all humanity.
In 2006, when Israel bombed Lebanon, at the time I was trying to evacuate members of my family and try to bring them over to the US, and there were no news. You needed to figure out how to reach to them. I became so angry again because here is my family under the bombing. One day I was watching TV. I saw girls crying, little girls. I saw they were Lebanese girls. And of course, every time I saw like Lebanese kids being bombed and everything, I was really, really angry. I was like, yes, like bomb the bastards kind of thing. And at the end, I realized they were reporting from the Israeli border, on the other side of the border. And they looked exactly the same as the Lebanese girls that were killed on the other side of the border. And I saw the pain. And that day I made a commitment to myself that I will no longer tolerate that kind of cruelty, irrespective of which side of the border it's happening.
Now, I'm not saying that if you and I rise up to become the people that we are capable of being, that we will rid this planet of war in our lifetime. But I believe with all my heart, we will achieve enough this lifetime that humanity will go in that direction.
It's embracing authentically who you are and not being ashamed of it. There's nothing to be ashamed of because everybody has a shadow. If somebody doesn't, they must be pathological.
When I'm leading the shadow process, it feels like my own journey has come full circle.
I've been very judgmental over the years. I was having some really dark dreams about you last night.
They're all true.
When we embrace our totality, we experience freedom.
My heart feels as big as my body. It's no longer like little anymore. It's like, it's me.
And embrace it with love. love, because that's what we're here for, to give and receive love.
Can't even believe that's you, Margaret. I figured out who you were. I remember. If I hadn't faced my darkness, I never would have found my light. Can't put my makeup on.